Good evening, dear listener. Tonight, we begin the Poppy's Tale, the story of a curious 12-year-old who discovers a hidden castle deep in the woods near her home. Within its quiet walls and overgrown gardens, she'll find magic, friendship, and a place waiting to be restored. If this gentle journey brings you calm, feel free to like and subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Now let the day fade, and step with me into Poppy's secret world. Poppy was eating her breakfast just as she did every morning. Her favorite doll, Mabel, sat neatly on the chair beside her, as though she, too, were waiting for the day to begin. Mabel had a red-stitched smile and shiny button eyes, and her black, curly wool hair framed her little cloth face in soft loops. She wore a blue pinafore dress that Poppy insisted suited her perfectly. Poppy had placed a bowl of porridge in front of Mabel. Porridge with honey drizzled generously across the top, matching her own bowl exactly. Whatever Poppy ate, Mabel ate too. That was the way it had always been. Poppy never went anywhere without Mabel. They had been inseparable for as long as Poppy could remember. They shared every meal, every adventure, every secret whispered beneath blankets or beneath trees. Poppy loved Mabel with all her heart, as only a child can love something she feels is entirely hers. When breakfast was finished, Poppy began packing a small bag, one for herself, and in her mind, for Mabel too. She planned to spend the entire day outdoors, and that meant they needed supplies. Into the bag went 2 bottles of water, one for each of them, and then a handful of snacks gathered from the cupboard. From the fridge, she selected sausage rolls, cool and flaky, and a box of strawberries. Mabel and Poppy had matching sunglasses, bright, cheerful, and a little too big. And Poppy tucked those inside as well. Her coin purse jingled as she added it to the bag. Soon, everything was ready. Poppy swung the bag over her shoulders, scooped Mabel gently into her arms, and stepped out into the garden. Poppy's house had a marvelous garden full of flowers and buzzing insects. But what she loved even more was the enormous forest that began just beyond it. That was where she and Mabel most loved to wander. In the garden, Poppy's father was sitting beneath an apple tree, reading a book with squinted, sleepy eyes. Poppy asked if she and Mabel could explore the woods. He smiled up at them. "Do you have water?" They did. Snacks? They had those too. Satisfied, he nodded and told her to be back by supper time. Poppy promised she would. And so, with Mabel tucked safely in her arms, Poppy pushed open the creaky wooden gate at the end of the garden and stepped into the forest. The path from the garden wound gently into the trees, and Poppy felt the ground grow softer under her feet. When she looked up, the treetops soared impossibly high. No matter how many times she visited, their height made her dizzy with awe. Poppy thought of the trees as friends, old guardians who watched over her as she wandered. This forest was ancient, wiser than she could ever be, and she believed its trees had healing powers. When she felt sad or confused, she would sit against the trunk of a great oak or beech or birch, and her worries would slowly lift away, taken by the bark, drawn up through the branches, and carried off into the sky. After a while, she reached a familiar fork in the path. Normally, she and Mabel chose one of the 3 routes ahead. There was the right-hand path, which they had walked many times. It led to a sparkling stream that sang over stones, catching sunlight in glittering fragments. Then there was the straight-ahead path, which climbed steeply up a grand hill. It was a tiring climb, but at the top, you could see the whole world, or so it felt. And finally, the path to the left, which wound toward a giant willow tree with a rope swing dangling from one of its long branches. They had spent many joyful afternoons there. Poppy waited for Mabel to choose which one they should take today. But as she looked around, something unusual caught her eye. Between the straight path and the rightward bend, where Poppy was certain no path had ever been, she saw a narrow, shadowed trail. It was partly hidden by low-hanging leaves, so thin and natural-looking that anyone might overlook it. Poppy stepped closer, puzzled. How had she never noticed it before? It didn't look like a path made by people. It looked like something the forest had made for itself. "Mabel, look," Poppy whispered. Together, they peered into the dim, twisting corridor of trees. The trail curled away like a secret waiting to be discovered. Poppy looked at Mabel's button eyes and felt certain she knew the answer. They were going to explore the new path. Of course, Mabel agreed. After pushing through the draping branches, they continued down the narrow, curling trail. They had no idea where it led, which only made it feel more magical and thrilling. Trees of every imaginable shape rose on either side of them. Trees Poppy had never seen in her life. Some wore leaves in strange colors and unfamiliar patterns. Others leaned toward one another as though whispering in an ancient tongue that human ears had forgotten how to understand. And there were trees that, Poppy was certain, no person had laid eyes on for thousands of years. The ground grew softer under her feet. The farther she walked, the thicker the moss became. Poppy paused, slipped off her shoes, and let her bare feet sink into it. The moss felt cool and springy, like a lush green cushion laid out just for her. Carrying her shoes in one hand and Mabel tucked safely in the other, she carried on along the new path. She felt more connected to the forest than ever before, as if the whole woodland breathed around her. With the soles of her feet meeting the earth, she sensed a rhythm in the trees, steady, ancient, and she matched it without even trying. After a while, Poppy suddenly remembered she hadn't eaten any of her snacks or had a sip of water. She stopped and glanced about for a place to sit. Just ahead was a log smothered in moss, as soft and inviting as a seat could be. She set Mabel down carefully, slipped off her rucksack, and began arranging their food as if the log were a proper dining table. They devoured the sausage rolls and crisps with great appetite. Poppy drank an entire bottle of water, then held Mabel's bottle to her stitched mouth with a smile. They finished with strawberries, sweet, plump, and wonderfully refreshing. Poppy cleaned everything up and tucked the rubbish into her bag to take home. Then they continued their journey. Birdsong had surrounded them from the moment they entered the woods, but now the melodies seemed different, sweeter somehow, and the birds appeared to be calling back and forth to one another, as if carrying a lively conversation no human language could describe. Poppy wondered what their bright tunes meant. She reached out a hand, brushing her fingers along the trunks of the trees they passed. The bark was rough, but somehow it didn't hurt her hand. It felt warm, textured, alive. A robin with a bright red chest fluttered down to the path. He tilted his head, studying Poppy and Mabel with bright, curious eyes. "Hello," Poppy said softly. "Hello," the bird replied. Poppy gasped. Surely it couldn't be. A talking bird? "This way," said the robin, lifting off the ground and darting down the trail. Poppy stared at Mabel, wide-eyed. There was only one possible thing to do. She hurried after the bird. He led her into a broad clearing, and Poppy froze, staring. At its center stood an enormous, ancient castle. It had soaring towers and pointed turrets, a wide moat with a bridge, more windows than she could count, and gardens stretching almost as far as she could see. But ivy smothered the walls, and the moat sat completely dry. The gardens had not been tended in many, many years. The whole place was breathtaking and regal, but forgotten, too, left to crumble in quiet loneliness. The robin swooped down again and landed nearby. "Welcome home, Princess Poppy," he said. Poppy blinked in confusion. How did he know her name? And she wasn't a princess, was she? "But you are," insisted the robin. We have awaited your return for centuries. Now you can restore the castle to its true glory and invite its old inhabitants home again." Poppy opened her mouth to explain that he must be mistaken, but something else caught her attention. From beneath a tangled bush near the castle wall, a pair of small round eyes peeked out. As she approached, a tiny bear cub shuffled into the open. He crouched beside her feet, staring up at her nervously, yet hopefully. He was one of the sweetest creatures Poppy had ever seen. She knelt down carefully, not wanting to frighten him, and stroked his soft brown fur. He relaxed almost immediately, leaning gently into her hand. "This way, princess," the robin called. He flew toward the bridge, crossing the dry moat, straight toward the castle's towering front doors. Poppy considered correcting him again. She wasn't a princess. But what harm could there be in taking a closer look? She turned to Mabel. Mabel, of course, seemed eager to continue exploring. The little bear raised a paw to her, and Poppy took it gently in her hand. Together, the three of them crossed the bridge. When Poppy pushed open one of the massive doors, it released a long, creaking sigh, as though relieved to be opened at last. She stepped inside, with the robin and the cub close behind. Then she felt movement in the crook of her arm. Mabel was wriggling. Poppy stared. Mabel's button eyes were blinking. Her stitched mouth curved upward into a smile. Poppy set her gently on the floor and watched as Mabel took her first unsteady steps. The robin swooped in a circle above them all and perched on the first step of a wide, sweeping staircase. Poppy slowly turned in place. Everything around her felt strangely familiar, as though she had stood here before, perhaps long ago, or in some half-remembered dream. The entrance hall was dim, its walls shadowy, the sunlight blocked by heavy velvet curtains. And as she gazed around, Poppy wondered whether the robin could possibly be right, whether she really did belong here, in this forgotten castle, waiting, patiently, silently, for her return. Poppy stepped across the stone floor and tugged the heavy curtains wide. Warm daylight flooded into the room. When she turned back, she saw that Mabel and the bear were already beginning to wander about, curious and delighted by the space now glowing beneath the sun. "Robin," Poppy said softly, "will you give us a tour?" The little bird bowed once with great dignity before lifting into the air and gliding up the staircase. The three companions followed, their excitement growing as they climbed through the ancient building. At the top landing, the robin guided them from room to room, each chamber more magnificent than the last. There were many floors to explore, with narrow spiral staircases tucked away in corners. tall turrets high enough to touch the clouds, and countless secret passageways. On the ground floor lay an enormous dining hall and a kitchen large enough for a whole brigade of cooks. Behind one panel in the wall, they found a hidden door leading to a forgotten library. The shelves were filled with books, every cover muted under a thick layer of dust. Huge, stained glass windows rose all the way to the ceiling, bathing the room in shimmering patches of color. Outside, they wandered the grounds. Crossing the old stone bridge, Poppy glanced down at the empty moat, and a strange memory tugged at her, of bright koi fish and still lily pads drifting on a mirrored surface. How odd! Mabel, newly confident on her small legs, was thrilled by everything she saw, darting through tall grass and weaving between overgrown flower beds. Poppy laughed and chased after her, savoring the sense of unbridled freedom in this forgotten sanctuary. It felt as though the place belonged only to them. The little brown bear galloped about on all fours, pursuing butterflies and buzzing bees with joyful clumsiness. As they ventured farther from the castle, Poppy heard the steady roar of water. She followed the sound until she reached a waterfall tumbling over broad stone slabs, feeding a stream that wound deep into the forest. Frogs perched on slick rocks and croaked lazily. Dragonflies, bright blue and fiery red, darted in flashes of color above the water. The small bear dipped his head and drank, whiskers trembling at the chill. Poppy stared in awe. She could hardly believe a place this beautiful had been forgotten entirely. "Does this place have a name?" she asked the robin. "It once did," the robin answered. "But time carried the name away, just as it carried away the memory of this place. Perhaps you would like to give it a new one." Poppy felt a rush of honor. She would need time to think. She wanted to choose a name worthy of such wonder. Looking around, she said, "I'd love to take care of this place, to tidy the grounds and restore the castle. What do you all think?" "I think that would be marvelous, Princess," the robin replied. Poppy glanced at Mabel and at the little bear. "Well then," she said with a grin, "let's get started." The four friends returned to the main building, ready to begin the grand project of restoring the castle and its surroundings. Poppy decided to start indoors. In the cellar, they discovered pots of paint, old brooms, soft brushes, and even a sewing machine that still sputtered to life when she tested it. Poppy assigned each of them a task. Because the robin could fly, he would handle repairs high above their reach, painting ceilings and tending to the enormous chandeliers. The little brown bear would sweep the floors, clear away the thick dust of many years, and polish the old furniture. Mabel would gather all the broken or peculiar items and decide which should be kept and which should be discarded. Poppy herself would paint the walls, mend the curtains, and arrange the furniture until the rooms felt like a home again. Once they gathered their tools, everyone set to work. With a paintbrush clasped neatly in his beak, the robin applied smooth layers of white paint to the ceilings, revealing delicate patterns and swirling designs hidden beneath the grime. He dusted the chandeliers and fitted fresh candles into their holders so they would glow again when lit. The little brown bear struggled with a dustpan and brush slightly too big for his paws, but he persisted, sweeping until he grew so drowsy that he curled into a small ball in one corner, snoring softly with his paws tucked over his nose. Poppy climbed a ladder she had found in a cupboard and repainted the walls. She wiped the tall windows clean, letting sunlight stream through in golden beams that chased the darkness away. She organized the furniture and brushed it down until the rooms felt warm and lived in once more. Then, with the robin's help, she removed the heavy curtains from their high rails and stitched up every rip and frayed seam using the old sewing machine. Mabel collected an assortment of oddities and treasures, arranging them into 2 piles on the long dining table. The pile marked "to keep" grew much faster than the pile to throw away. Among her discoveries were a gramophone with only a tiny crack in its horn, a china tea set with a teapot, milk jug, and a curious number of mismatched cups and saucers, a grandfather clock missing its hour hand, and an ancient vase painted with koi fish and drifting lily pads. By the time evening approached, all 4 of them were exhausted, and they had only finished the ground floor. Many more rooms still waited above. Poppy and Mabel collapsed onto a long, cushioned sofa, and before they knew it, their eyes drifted shut. The robin nestled onto a nearby cushion and soon joined them in sleep, and the little brown bear woke from his corner to curl up beside them. He curled himself into the comfortable hollow of Poppy's arm and drifted back to sleep without a sound. Together, they lay there, breathing in slow, steady whispers that filled the grand room with a peaceful rhythm, slumbering deeper and deeper as the hours passed. When morning finally arrived, Poppy stirred. The first light of day slipped across the freshly polished floors, stretching slowly over the 4 of them, still bundled together in a cozy heap upon the couch. Poppy blinked at her dozing companions and smiled. Careful not to disturb a single one, she rose quietly and wandered into the dining hall. There, she found the neat piles Mabel had arranged the day before. Poppy paused to admire the delicate tea set and the old gramophone. Then her gaze drifted to the painted vase. Lifting it with gentle hands, she studied the scenes around its curved sides. Graceful koi fish, drifting lily pads, tiny ripples painted in soft strokes. A memory surfaced, the old moat shimmering with fish and lily pads long ago. A spark of inspiration lit up her face. Stepping outside through the front doors, Poppy crossed onto the bridge. She leaned over the edge, looking down into the empty moat below, waiting patiently to be filled again. Footsteps sounded behind her, and when she turned, Mabel and the little brown bear were already hurrying toward her. The robins fluttered after them and settled on the railing. "Good morning, Princess. What adventure awaits today?" Poppy answered only with a smile, pointing toward the moat. Together, they retrieved a stack of old pails from the basement. Then, making trip after cheerful trip, they gathered water from the waterfall at the far end of the garden and poured it into the waiting moat. Before long, the entire trench shimmered with fresh, clear water. But a new question pressed into Poppy's thoughts. Where could she possibly find koi fish and lily pads? As she stood thinking, something drifted downward from the sky. A golden feather, glinting softly as it spiraled above the water. It touched the surface and began to shift, growing larger, glowing brighter, reshaping itself. To Poppy's astonishment, the feather unfurled into two tiny koi fish that darted around each other in playful circles. Then a green leaf loosened from a branch overhead and twirled lazily until it landed in the moat as well. It sank for a moment before breaking apart and reforming into wide, magnificent lily pads that rose gently to the surface. Poppy gasped. Magic, true, gentle magic, still lived in this place. She called the others over, and they gathered at the edge, marveling at the water, now alive with color and movement. As they admired the moat, Poppy glanced across the sprawling garden. Hedges grew wild, grass reached high, and empty beds waited patiently for new flowers. There was so much work ahead, yet Poppy felt no dread. Every moment spent here, surrounded by friends, both long known and newly met, filled her with joy. She couldn't remember ever feeling happier. Still, something faint tugged at her memory. A tiny house, a quiet yard, someone waiting beneath a tree. But the image slipped away before she could catch it. That could be sorted out another day. For now, with the moat restored, it was time to return to the garden and make the rest of it thrive. With a bright step, Poppy headed toward the greenery, and the robins, Mabel, and the little brown bear followed her faithfully. Poppy stood in the heart of the vast stretch of land that made up the castle gardens. Tilting her face toward the sky, she closed her eyes for a moment. She breathed in the crisp air feeling a soft breeze sweep through her hair. She could hear the lovely chorus of many kinds of birds, and the warm sunlight rested gently upon her skin. A second later, she felt a light tug at her trouser leg and opened her eyes. Looking down, she saw her dearest friend, Mabel the doll, staring up at her. Mabel had been Poppy's treasured companion for as long as she could remember. And ever since they had arrived in this enchanted place, the doll had come to life. Mabel smiled with her stitched little mouth and stretched out her arms. Poppy scooped her up. Mabel wrapped her soft fabric arms around Poppy's neck. And even though she had no voice, Poppy understood perfectly that she was thanking her for bringing them somewhere so wonderful. A rustling noise stirred in the bushes off to one side. Poppy and Mabel turned toward the sound and spotted the small brown bear peeping out at them from beneath the branches. Then he slipped away into the leaves. Curious, Poppy and Mabel got down onto their hands and knees. They peered under the bush, trying to see where the bear had wandered. They caught sight of his back as he padded away along a wild little path. To follow him, they would need to crawl. Poppy lay flat on her stomach, but she still wouldn't fit beneath the tangle of leaves. Then Mabel had an idea. She pulled aside as much of the greenery as her tiny hands could manage, opening a space wide enough for Poppy to squeeze through. Poppy wriggled close to the ground and slipped through the narrow opening. Once she reached the other side, she lifted the branches so that Mabel could crawl after her. This part of the garden was easily the most tangled, forgotten corner of the whole place. They would need tools if they hoped to clear it, but of course, they didn't have any with them. Then they remembered the little brown bear. Glancing ahead, they spotted him again on the winding trail. Stepping over fallen twigs and thick leaves, Poppy and Mabel followed the path until it curved sharply. There, at the bend, sat the little brown bear, lazily licking one paw. Behind him stood a wooden building. It was a garden shed, though far grander than an ordinary one. It was as big as a small cottage, with charming little windows on each side of the door. Standing on her tiptoes, Poppy peered through one of the windows, and what she saw made her grin. The shed was packed with every kind of gardening tool. Everything they needed was right there. Lawn mowers, hedge trimmers, shovels, spades, more tools than she had ever seen in one place. Poppy tried the handle, but when she pushed, the door wouldn't budge. It was locked. She frowned and looked from Mabel to the bear, wondering what they should do next. At that very moment, a flutter of wings announced the arrival of the robin. He wasn't an ordinary bird, though. This robin could speak. As he settled on a nearby branch, Poppy noticed something shiny clutched in his beak. It sparkled in the sunlight. It was a key. The robin opened his beak, letting the key drop gently onto the grass at Poppy's feet. "Princess Poppy," he said, "I have brought you the shed key. It was lost long ago. But this morning, while stretching my wings, I noticed something gleaming in the stream at the edge of the garden. The key had been resting among the stones beneath the water." "Thank you, Robin," said Poppy. "Your keen eyesight has found exactly what we needed." She slipped the key into the shed's lock and turned it until she heard a satisfying click. She opened the door and stepped inside, her friends right behind her. They stared in wonder at the rows and rows of tools. Each of them chose something useful: shears, clippers, and more. Poppy even discovered an old-fashioned scythe. Then, armed with their tools, they walked back down the path toward the overgrown bush. What better place to begin than right here? Poppy set to work, trimming the great bush back to a friendlier size. Mabel and the little brown bear teamed up, tugging roots from the path and clearing away the thicker branches. The robin hopped about, sweeping aside the loose leaves. They worked in quiet companionship, each mind focused on the task before them. By midday, the progress was astonishing, far more than anyone would expect from 4 complete beginners. With the branches cut back and the leaves gathered, the bush now allowed them to pass through easily, and the path leading toward the shed lay open once again. "Where next?" asked the robin. Everyone chose their own patch. Since Poppy alone was tall enough to handle the scythe, she would take on the long, waving grass. Mabel and the little brown bear would tend the flower beds, and the robin would trim the remaining wild bushes and tangled branches. The sun shone warmly overhead, its bright light slipping into every corner they worked on, almost as though it, too, wished to assist. As Mabel and the little brown bear cleared the weeds from the flower beds, small buds pushed up from the soil. The sun coaxed them open, the petals unfolding like tiny faces turning toward the light. Poppy had never held a scythe before, yet it felt perfectly natural in her hands, almost as if her muscles already remembered how this old tool was meant to move. She gripped the smooth wooden handle, keeping the curved blade hovering just above the ground. Then, planting her feet firmly, she swung from right to left. The blade sliced through the tall, dry stalks, dropping them instantly. It was deeply satisfying, and quick, too. Poppy felt the pleasant ache of her back and arms, and welcomed the feeling of honest, sweaty work. Meanwhile, the robin was busy high in the branches. From his perch, he could see the entire garden spread out below. With his sharp beak, he carefully chipped away twigs and shoots, always checking each bough for nests or sleeping insects before he touched it. He met many friends as he worked, and whenever they asked what he was doing, he proudly chirped that Princess Poppy had returned at last. His bird companions burst into song at the news and promised to spread word across the grounds. After a while, Poppy paused for a rest. The day was glorious, but the heat was growing. Setting the scythe gently aside, she lay back in the patch of tall grass that still remained. It provided a soft cushion beneath her and a little cool shade above. On her back, she saw nothing but the tips of the grass drifting in the breeze and the vast blue sky beyond. She breathed in the garden's green fragrance and smiled. It felt like paradise. Her eyelids grew heavier and heavier, and she let them fall. Within moments, she was asleep, wrapped in a quiet world of grass and warmth. Mabel and the little brown bear had nodded off as well, curled up together on the cool soil among the freshly opened flowers. The robin, noticing the others slumbering, tucked himself beneath the branches of a willow tree, sheltering from the midday sun. With his head nestled into his red breast feathers, he soon drifted into a gentle doze. About an hour later, Poppy stirred awake. She stretched her arms and legs and sat up, feeling wonderfully refreshed. Rising to her feet, she tiptoed to peer over the tall grass. Where had the others gone? Pushing through the remaining stalks, she stepped out into the clearer part of the garden. And there they were. But they were not alone. A young fawn, a rabbit, and a bright-eyed red squirrel stood waiting for her. "Princess Poppy," said the robin from a nearby branch, "your old friends heard you had returned, and they've come to welcome you home." The animals bowed. Poppy blinked in amazement. "How lovely to meet you," she said softly. She knelt so she was closer to them. They began to approach, hesitant at first, then growing bolder. The squirrel scampered forward and placed a nut before her as a gift. Then the rabbit hopped nearer, gently resting one paw on Poppy's knee. She smiled and stroked his fur, silky as a cloud, and he happily clambered into her lap. His warm, gentle weight comforted her. The fawn approached last, shy and delicate. Her tawny coat was sprinkled with white spots, like tiny stars scattered across her back. She bowed her head, unable to look Poppy directly in the eyes. Poppy sensed her timidity and waited with patience. Her calm smile told the young deer it was safe. At last, the fawn stepped close. Their eyes met. Slowly, Poppy lifted a hand, asking silently if she might stroke her. The fawn lowered her gaze in quiet permission. Poppy reached out. She had never been this close to a deer before. She felt deeply grateful that such a timid, wondrous creature would let her draw so near. With one hand still scratching the rabbit gently behind its velvety ears, Poppy lifted her other hand toward the little fawn's head. She brushed her fingertips through the soft fur, marveling at how smooth and warm it felt beneath her touch. Soon enough, all the animals had grown so comfortable and so bold that they began playing with each other and with Poppy as though they had always been friends. The fawn bent her slim legs so Mabel could climb onto her back. The red squirrel perched proudly on Poppy's shoulder, and the small brown bear trotted along at her side, while the bunny darted in and out of the tall grass, chasing them all in circles. They giggled and squealed every time one of them nearly got caught. Then Poppy noticed her scythe still lying in the grass where she had left it earlier. The animals gathered curiously around it, wondering what sort of strange object it might be. With careful hands, Poppy showed them how she used the scythe to trim the grass and tidy the garden. After seeing how it worked, every animal immediately wanted to help. Poppy smiled to herself, imagining how quickly they would finish their chores with so many eager helpers. And so, they all spread out and began working happily. Poppy cut the grass until the lawn lay smooth and perfect. The robin trimmed back low-hanging branches and shaped the bushes into whimsical sculptures. The fawn and the little brown bear gathered fallen leaves and loose clippings, piling them neatly, while the rabbit and squirrel scampered through the undergrowth. Together, they uncovered hidden pathways winding through the grounds, leading to a little vegetable allotment and a secret orchard brimming with apple trees. When the morning's work was done, they shared lunch on the fresh-cut lawn. The squirrel brought nuts and forest fruits. The robin flew to the waterfall and carried water in a tiny pail clasped in his beak. And the others gathered crisp vegetables from the allotment and bright apples from the orchard trees. They ate side by side, the happiest group of friends anyone could hope to find. After they had rested a while, they decided to return the tools to the shed and see what else needed attention inside the castle. Poppy led the way, followed by the brown bear, Mabel, the robin, the fawn, and the two little forest friends. They crossed the arched bridge over the moat and pushed open the great castle doors. With the ground floor spotless, they fanned out once more to explore the remaining rooms, passageways, turrets, and towers. There were cobwebs to sweep away, windows to repair, dusty floors to polish, and dozens of small tasks waiting to be done. Poppy returned to her favorite place of all, the hidden library. She had discovered it on her very first day here, which felt like years ago now. In fact, when she tried to think about it properly, she realized she could not recall a time when she hadn't been here. Something tugged at the back of her mind, a half-memory of someone sitting beneath a tree in a tiny garden, but it felt too distant to grasp. Perhaps it had only been a dream. This castle was her home, and she was determined to make it fit for a princess, and for all the princess's friends. Meanwhile, Mabel and the little brown bear struggled up the long staircase on their small legs. But once they reached the landing, they found a hallway lined with doors leading to elegant but neglected bedrooms. One room, with more windows than walls and a magnificent four-poster bed, caught their attention at once. They decided they had discovered the princess's chamber and immediately shut the door so they could prepare a delightful surprise for Poppy. High above them, the robin flew to the tallest tower, higher even than the oldest tree. Its stained glass windows opened wide enough for birds to slip through with ease. The robin knew at once that this tower would be a perfect winter nesting place for his family and all the birds who wished to stay nearby. He set to work weaving warm, cozy nests. The rabbit, the fawn, and the squirrel explored the remaining bedrooms until they found one they wished to share. There were many to choose from, but the three of them were so close, more like family than mere friends, that none of them could imagine sleeping far from the others at any hour of the day or night. After choosing their room, each animal set to work in a different part of the castle. Curtains needed mending, ornaments and floors needed dusting, chandelier candles needed replacing, and the walls were overdue for a fresh coat of paint. Everything they required, brooms, brushes, buckets, cloths, was tucked away in the basement. They opened every window to let the breeze sweep through, carrying out all the stale air and ushering in something crisp and new. The castle slowly began to feel awake again. Dust flew from curtains, rugs, and pillows. The floors were scrubbed so clean the animals could see their reflections, and the walls shone with fresh paint. The robin flew back and forth, gathering twigs and leaves for his growing number of nests. Soon they were soft, snug, and ready for winter guests. Birds of every kind, swallows, magpies, wrens, finches, landed in the open windows and sang cheerful songs to Poppy and her companions as they worked. Down in the library, Poppy dusted the books one by one. There were hundreds upon hundreds of heavy, ancient volumes, each filled with stories. She handled them with reverence, knowing some were older than she was, perhaps older even than the castle itself. After lifting each book from its shelf, she wiped it clean with a gentle hand before sliding it carefully back into place. She worked this way all afternoon, content in the warm quiet of the library, listening to birdsong drifting through the windows. At last, Mabel and the little brown bear knocked excitedly at the door. They had something special to show her. Poppy followed her two tiny friends out of the library, across the vast hall, and up the winding staircase. They guided her along a long, bright corridor. And as they passed, the fawn, the squirrel, and the rabbit peeked out from the rooms they were busy in and trotted after them as well. At the very end of the passageway stood a great wooden door. It was covered in carvings, lovely woodland scenes of small creatures among towering trees, and at the center of it all was a girl. Poppy stepped closer. The girl in the carving had long, flowing hair and wore a gown fit for a princess. A doll rested on her hip, and tucked in her other arm was what looked like a little brown bear. Poppy felt her heart swell. They had found her room. She pushed the door gently open and walked inside, her friends hurrying in behind her. What she saw made her stop in awe. It was the most enchanting bedroom she had ever imagined. In the center stood a grand four-poster bed, its curtains falling on all four sides, its blankets soft and rich, and its pillows far too many to count. Beside it stood a dressing table with a stool and a 3-panel antique mirror. Colorful rugs lay scattered across the polished wooden floor, and tall wardrobes lined the walls, ready to hold her clothes and treasures. But best of all was the view. 3 tall windows looked out across the castle grounds to the forest beyond. From here, she could both see and hear the waterfall, its soothing sound drifting in like a lullaby. It was the perfect place to fall asleep. Poppy looked down at her 2 small friends, tears of happiness shimmering in her eyes. She could hardly believe the kindness of what they had done for her. She knelt, wrapped them both in a warm embrace, and thanked them over and over. And that was how the years passed. Princess Poppy and all her companions lived together in perfect harmony, sharing meals in the great dining hall, reading for hours in the library, and playing among the flowers in the garden. In the winter months, birds nested in the highest tower and laid their eggs there. When the chicks hatched, they too were welcomed into the family. No one was ever lonely, and no one ever lacked for anything. They grew their vegetables in the allotment, gathered fresh water from the waterfall, and in the library, they had enough books to last at least a century. One day, Poppy and Mabel were wandering in the garden near the forest's edge. They noticed a narrow trail disappearing into the trees and decided to follow it. They walked past oaks and beeches, past elms and birches. Eventually, they reached a fork in the path and chose to go straight ahead until they came to a small fence with a little gate. Beyond it lay a garden attached to a house. Poppy pushed the gate open and stepped inside. "There you are," called a voice, "just in time for supper." Poppy looked toward the house and saw her mother waving from the window, and there was her father, too, sitting beneath the tree with a book still open in his lap. Poppy stared at Mabel. How had she forgotten all this for so long? But Mabel only blinked. Of course she couldn't reveal her magic in front of Poppy's mum and dad. So Poppy lifted Mabel into her arms and carried her toward the warm house. Something delicious was cooking. Her mother had made her favorite, vegetable stew with plenty of potatoes. As Poppy settled at the table, she beamed at her parents. She could hardly wait to tell them everything about her grand adventure. And when no one was watching, she and Mabel exchanged a secret little wink. And so we'll leave Poppy and Mabel here, sitting together at the table, ready to enjoy a good meal. Good night and sweet dreams.